Hello, everyone. Henry and Tim here from Enterprise DNA. What we're going to go through today is we're going to show you how to connect Power BI and Power Automate. One very simple use case of that is if you have a Power BI report that lists, for example, customers, clients, even members of your own team in a list, and you want to be able to cycle through each one and do something for each customer, client, or team member. For example, you want to send them an email. What you can do actually is you can connect Power BI to Power Automate, where you first in that list, you highlight the records that you want that action to occur for, and then you click a button, and then a Power Automate script basically gets triggered that either sends an email or perhaps makes them a file, something like that for each customer, client, or record. Now, when Tim and I were first tackling that, it's fairly easy to actually do that, and Tim will walk us through. But the error that we had come up with is sometimes you can have users who click the button before actually filtering to specific records. And let's say if you have a list of all your team members in your organization, and let's say if you're part of a 10,000 or employee company, you don't want to send emails to 10,000 people. So what you want to have in your Power Automate script is a way to have a threshold, where if someone basically wants to send an email to a list of people from that list, they need to filter it to a list less than 10, 20, 30, it's up to you. But you need to have that stop there. Otherwise, you end up sending thousands and thousands of emails unnecessarily, which kind of blocks your Outlook system and all that Tim will generally talk about. So happy to have everyone here. Should we get started, Tim?
Let's jump right into it. Happy to be here.
Great.
All right, so let me share my screen. All right, so let me jump right to, just following on, Henry, what you were talking about, here's a good example of, let's say I've got a list of, people, some names, maybe got visuals over here, but for purposes of this, I've just got a real simple table. Now, in my example, I'm really only showing 6 names, but, in your report, like you said, you could have hundreds, thousands of records in this table. And the great thing about Power Automate is using that functionality to send emails automatically rather than having to, send them manually. However, as I'll show, you got to run into some potential issues. So I'll talk about that. But let me just kind of quickly show this just as a quick example. Say here, I've got my table and I want to send just an email to my sales reps in the East. So I've got 2 of them here. I've got Melissa and I have Sam. So I've just highlighted them and I have a button up here. This is a Power Automate button that I've connected into my report, and I just trigger it and off the email goes. Now, in my situation, I'll have the email sent to me because just so that I could show this. And if I quickly move over to my inbox, here are the 2 emails that were triggered from Power Automate from the Power BI report, and now were sent to me. And then, and obviously these would have gone to the user. The issue is, let's say, as you were saying, I didn't filter this and I sent this. So a couple of issues that I have experienced, and I want to kind of highlight here before I walk through sort of setting up the email process and then putting in that, that conditional stopgap measure that I like to refer to it as is. So a couple of the issues is, as I said here, the first one is we've sort of touched on, when you have a table that has lots of, hundreds or thousands of records, it really can clog up your email system. The other thing that people may not be aware of is if your table has a hidden filter in it, but it's not the same filter that is in your Power Automate button, you can have some unforeseen results. So for example, right, if I were to, if I put this over here, right, and this was what I was looking at, and I see here that I have a filter just on this table, and I look at this filter and there is no filters, you could run into that. So this, we're not going to touch on that today, but again, this is sort of like something that I ran into one time, and it's just something nice to point out.
Right.
So let me just walk right through what I did. First, I'm going to kind of walk through setting up sending the email and then I will throw in the technique I use to help with that sort of prevent lots of emails going through. So I've got a second page here. So here's my table. And I have let me go ahead and add over my Power Automate. This should be a standard visual that is in that shows up in your visuals. And the first thing it's going to ask for is fields. So every time you pull this over, it will ask for fields. Now, it does not have to be all of the fields that you have in your visuals. It only is, it's the data that you need for your flow. So in my case, I need the email address. I'm going to have the name because maybe I want to add in the name. Maybe I want to add in the title.
Right.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add into my visual my name. I've actually got 2 email addresses, but just for demonstration purposes, this is the one so that as we go through the process, it'll be sent to me. And I'll add in title because I want the title. But again, it does not have to be these. I could have other attributes. Now that I have that set up and I have this data in here, I can just go up here to the ellipsis and then do the edit. Now this will send me to Power Automate. One thing also to be aware, because I know I've gone through your Power Automate series on Enterprise DNA, which is excellent, is in order to access the fields here, you actually have to go through this process here versus going. You can access the flow once I've saved it. You can access it in the Power Automate application itself, but it's a lot more difficult to actually access the dynamic fields in Power BI. So I tend to do a lot of my development here, but just so you know, you can do both.
Got it. So this is a Power Automate shell within Power BI, and it's much easier to develop the flow here rather than opening up a Power Automate web browser and doing it there. Okay.
Correct.
Great.
And I'll show that to some extent. So let me go ahead. Now I've got a couple of flows already set up. That the one I tested, it's this one down at the bottom, but let's go ahead and create a new one. So that's what I'll do. So start from a template or instant cloud flow. And in my case, I want the instant cloud flow. Mm-hmm. It'll automatically add this Power BI button clicked. So now I'm going to go into my connector. So I know I want to send an email. So there are a couple of options you have, and I'm just going to touch on those. So when I type in send an email, you have the V2 and the V3. My understanding and my experience with the V3, and correct me if I'm wrong, is this will be sent from the Power Automate service itself. And then the second one, this will actually come from the user who built the flow. It'll come from their email, their email inbox.
Yep, that's correct.
Now, one thing to be aware of is what I understand is when you use the send an email notification through the Power Automate, you are limited to, I believe it's 100 emails a day. So that right there could be a built-in, approach. However, if you wanted the email to come from you, then obviously you have to use this version, which I'm going to do. So I simply do that. It asks me for the name, and I'll add my dynamic content. And I always forget this, that, I think you always have said this too in your trainings, where I'm missing some of my fields where right. I want this. Now, in my case, I only needed, there's only 2 email addresses that I need. So I have the user email, which is a default one, which this one does appear, and I will actually access that later. I'll show you how I use that. And then here's here's the data field that I've added. So I simply put that in.
Got it. So just to clarify, the user email, well, the first dynamic data that we saw over there is the user's email address, the person who actually clicks the button, right?
Correct.
Got it. Okay, we don't want that for this one. We only want the Power BI data email, which is the email in the table. Got it. Okay.
That is correct. Now we're gonna use this email later on. I'll show you that when I go further.
Awesome.
And because and I think, and you know this, having gone through your trainings, because the data that is coming from the Power BI report has multiple records, it automatically converts it to the apply to each control.
Perfect.
So I just have to reopen it up. There's my two. I added my subject. So let me just add, this is an email for, and I'll just put in the users. Let me just put in the name. Again, just adding more dynamic content. I could say, dear, add in their name. Here is your email. And if I save that, let me give it a name here. And email test. So this right here is the basic principle, which is and all you need to do to set up an email thing. So if I save and then I apply this, if I save and apply, now when I go back and I run these tests, it's going to go ahead and send all the emails.
Awesome.
Now,
but then we run into your issues, I'm guessing, right?
We run into the issues because what happens now if you have 1,000 rows and all of a sudden it's going to cycle through the apply to each 1,000 times. So the way I came up with this is I want to be able to tell the flow if it is above a threshold that I determine. So say I want the threshold to be, I'll just say, in this case, since I only have 6 records, I'm going to say 3. If it's above 3, if it's above 3 records that I've selected, don't stop the flow. That will, and then send a thing to the user. So what I need to do is identify how many records there are. So the way I approached this was, well, let's just create a variable. So I'm going to go and add my action. I am going to find my variables. And I will, first step is I'll initialize it. So let me call this, I'll just call it record count. I make it an integer because I want to just have a count, and I'll start with 0. Okay, so now that I have my variable initialized, what I want to do is now increment the variable. So that'll help me determine how many records were selected when I clicked on the Power BI, the button. So easy way to do that is I'm going to add in an action. And because this is, I want to cycle through every one, I'm going to go ahead and use the apply to each. So I'm going to go here to the control, and I'm going to select apply to each. And then what I want to do is the apply to each. I want to cycle through each one of the records, and I can choose really any of the my Power BI fields. So I'm just going to choose name. Now you'll notice it'll throw us in an extra one because there are multiple. So I'm going to delete that. And now through each one, I'm going to add in an action of, I want to increment my variable. So let me go here. And in the variable, there is the increment variable option. So I will choose that. And for my variable, I will select the record count, which I initialized previously. And I want to increment it by a value of 1. So now I have that. And what that'll do now is it'll cycle through every single record in my data set, and then it'll increment that. And at the end, I'll have the total count of how many records there are. And this is what I can now use in my conditional statement.
Got it. And Tim, what's the purpose of doing 2 different loops? You have one loop that goes through each record and increments a variable, and then the loop that actually sends out the email.
So the reason you have to use 2, the reason I used 2 in my example is I wanted the first loop, this first loop applied to each is the loop that determines how many records are in here. Once that's finished, it'll tell me at the end that if I've selected 5 records, it'll loop through this cycle 5 times. At the end, my variable record count will have the value 5 because I've incremented it that many times. You have to do that first because once I want to be able to use that in my condition, which I will jump to right now.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense.
So now, I'm going to go ahead and close this for just to make it easier. So now that I've gone through this step and created my variable that I've called record count, let me add a condition. So this is where I want to go into the control, and I want to add a condition, and where I'll pull in so I want to pull in my record count variable. So I pull this in, And if it is, I'm going to choose the equal to, less than or equal to. And I'm going to, in my case, I'm going to use 3 because I only have 6 records. This could be 3, 10, 20, whatever you want.
Right.
What I want to do is to say, if the record count, my variable, which I determine the value from this loop that we just talked about, if it's less than 3, then I want to go down the yes path. If not, then I want then go down this, which this will be my where I cancel the flow. So here's the flow that I want to have. The step I want when it's less than or equal to 3 records. And all I have to do here is, since I've already created it, I just move it. And now it's there. It'll send the email and all will be good. If this condition, if this variable record count is greater than 3, so say I select 4 more records, then it's going to go through here. This is where I'm going to do 2 things. First of all, I want to alert the user know. So I'm going to do my send an email. And I'm going to choose the V2 again. Now, this is where we had talked about earlier, the field in this Power BI. This was the user email. So again, this is that field now that comes into handy because it's who triggered the flow.
Got it. Okay. That makes sense.
So I'm going to choose that. Here's my, so the flow was canceled. I'm just going to say the flow was canceled. Selected. And this is where I can pull in my variable. Of course, it doesn't show, so I have to search for it. I learned this. It took me a while to figure this one out. Records, the limit is, I think in my case, 3. Okay. So now I've done that. So let me save and apply. And the other thing I was going to point out is I've applied it because it says here. And I'm going to go back to my report. Let me go ahead and test it first. Let's make sure this runs. So what I've got is I'm going to go ahead and select, let's say in my case, I'm going to select, let me select 2. I'll just select 2 records here. Let me run the flow. It's triggered. And let me jump over, and there are the emails. So there's the Henry, there's your email. And of course, in my example, in the real life situation, it would have been sent right to you.
Right.
But here are the 2 emails. Now, let me just select all. And this should trigger that condition, which should cancel my flow. There's my email. The flow was canceled. You've selected 6 records. The limit is 6. Perfect. So one quick thing I want to point out is when you go to attach a flow, unfortunately, I don't think there is a way that, like this. Here's the flow. Send email test. This is one that is applied to that button, but there's no indication here. So it's just something to be aware of.
Got it. Okay.
Okay. Do we have time for one quick bonus feature?
Yes, let's do it.
Okay. So I want to throw in one little quick feature here. Let's say your users don't have access to the flow and you want to give them the ability to choose the record limit. So in my case, I did 3. Let's say I want to give them the option to choose 5. What I've done here is I got a little slicer, all this, and then what I'll have is I'll show you as I embed in the flow another variable that you can now make this selection be that limit. And all I did here was I've just created, this is just a simple table. I just created a simple, I called it max selection count. And this is what I'm using for my slicer. So I've got 1, 3, 5, and 100. I just typed them in. That column max selection is what is in my slicer. This is just a simple slicer. And I have created a measure. I just called it selected max records. And all I'm using is the selected value function. And it's just selecting what is in this slicer. Now you do want to make sure it's converted to a radio button so that the user selects one. And now I've just in my flow, I've added that measure. So now what I'm sending to the flow
okay.
is this number. And if I quickly, I've already got the flow done up, so we're just going to show that real quick. I have it right here, so let's edit that. Here's the first variable I've initialized. I just created a second one called max records variable, and again, make it an integer. And now I do another loop, very same thing. I loop through that same step, but instead of doing incrementing, I'm just doing the set variable, and here's my measure, that selected max records. All I'm doing is setting that measure, setting my variable here, the same value of that measure, whatever selected. So it just loops through the same thing every time. But again, at the end, now my max records variable is set with that measure that I've created. And in my condition, all I've done is, instead of having it hard coded, I've just plugged in my max records variable. So now it's dynamic. And then I've just added it in my email. I can just say here, the number selected was, here's my record count, and then this exceeded. So again, just a little extra way to add in some additional variables. So
great. Yeah, no, that is awesome. So what we kind of went through is a way to take your Power BI reports to the next level. And specifically, you can have a table and click a button that basically executes a process, for example, sending an email to each record. And then I'm sure, Tim, the reason why we also went through including the stopgap is I'm sure you've done this in your reports and then accidentally sent an email to 10,000 people and then got in trouble for it.
Yeah, this is a new technique I'm going to start doing because, again, it's, I always want to be careful there. So hopefully this people will find this useful.
Yeah, this is great. Let us know if you have any questions in the comments below. Take care, everyone.
Thanks.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to Enterprise DNA TV. If you enjoyed the content covered in this particular tutorial, please throw the video a like. It really helps us and we really appreciate it. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the Enterprise DNA TV channel. We have a huge amount of content coming out all the time from myself and a range of content creators, all dedicated to improving the way that you use Power BI and the Power Platform. Lastly, check out Enterprise DNA's website, plenty of resources and further learning that you can access very easily. All the best. Take care.